welcome back. In today's video, we've got another trade rumor video to discuss. In today's video, we're looking at some signings from our past couple of days, a couple of very interesting news updates, and we've got some trade rumors involving the Bruins, the Red Wings, the Jets, and the Wild. Go to all the updates from our past couple of days coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. I'm sorry if there's any background noise today, but in today's video, we are looking at another news and rumor video to discuss. As per usual, we'll start with some signings from our past couple of days. Only 2 signings from our past couple of days to talk about, so we'll touch on both these signings here. So first, in the Dallas Stars organization, they have signed UFA forward Nathan Bastien, who has spent the past number of seasons in the New Jersey Devils organization. Didn't get signed, so he turned to a UFA. He gets a 1-year deal with the AAV of league minimum with the Dallas Stars. So it's a solid signing there for the Dallas Stars. They could definitely use some more bottom 6 help. Really didn't do much this offseason besides signing guys like Fox and Blackwell to help in the bottom 6 role. So they're going to sign Bastien, who's easily a solid 4th line forward. He had 4 goals and 10 points in 59 games last year. After the previous year, he had 5 goals and 12 points in 54 games. So throughout his entire career, he's been able to put between 10 and 20 points, between like 5 and 10 goals. So Bastien's a really solid 4th line guy. I think he worked really well either on the wing or the center group of the 4th line for the Dallas Stars. And for a league minimum for a solid 4th line forward, that's not a bad deal there for the Dallas Stars. So very interesting note there, but the Dallas Stars have signed UFA Bastien to a new deal. And then we saw Seattle Kraken, some of their RFAs, and one of the guys who I thought could have potentially been a RFA sheet candidate, and that is RFA Evans. Evans, who's a young defenseman, one of the first ever draft selections of the Seattle Kraken. Recently was able to get into NHL action. Actually had a really good season last year. He was an RFA. He didn't get signed right out of the start of the offseason. So a couple weeks ago when I was mentioning players who I could see still getting offer sheet, he was one of the guys who I put on that list. But like I said back then, I didn't think there was a very likely chance he would get qualified because of the amount of cap space that the Kraken had. And he doesn't. The 23-year-old right shot defenseman gets a 2-year contract extension in Seattle with an AAV of $2.05 million. So not too surprising there. In his first full season at the NHL level last year, had 5 goals and 25 points in 73 games, and he's just going to keep on getting better. So $2 million for a young up-and-coming defenseman who's one of their top draft selections in their first ever draft selection year. I don't think that's a bad deal there for the Kraken. And if he continues to work out well, this could be a very solid deal for Seattle Kraken. So very interesting note there. But RFA Evans in Seattle, who was an RFA, and Nathan Bastien, who was UFA, has signed with Seattle and Dallas respectively. So very interesting note there. And we shall see how Evans and Bastien do this upcoming season. But those are the only 2 signings from our past couple of days. Next, going over to a couple of news updates. So the first news update I want to talk about here is with players signing overseas, as Korhonen, who's been an AHL player for the past couple of years. I think he was playing over in Toronto or Winnipeg last year. I'm not exactly sure, but he was an AHL player, been an AHL player for a long time, had a couple of small NHL stints in his NHL career, but he wasn't getting an NHL opportunity. He was a UFA. He went to UFA status. He was probably going to be an AHL level player again if he signed with an NHL level team. So instead of that, he signs over in the SHL. So very interesting note there. We shall see what happens with Korhonen, but not surprising. He was most likely going to be AHL level player. So instead of signing with the NHL or AHL level team, he signs over in the SHL, and we shall see how he does. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to Minnesota Wild. We talked about a PTO that was signed a couple of weeks ago in one of our recent videos, with Connor Shearer signing a PTO in the New York Rangers organization. Well, another player has signed a PTO, and that is defenseman Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson, who last year I think spent with the Columbus Blue Jackets, a couple of years back was in Colorado. He spent some time in Pittsburgh, and there was a number of other teams Johnson has played with. He was not able to get an NHL level contract right out of the offseason, so instead he's going to be going to training camp on a PTO with the Minnesota Wild. So the Wild could definitely use maybe 1 or 2 more depth defensemen. Like the defense, so long as they're all healthy, like Brody might miss the start of the season, so that might make some sense as to why Johnson's going to training camp on a PTO. But this team, if Brody's healthy and they have all of their players healthy, is going to have one of the scariest defensive cores in the entire NHL this offseason. I mean, you got Spurgeon, you got Middleton, you got Brodin, Faber, Juracek, and Blueline. Like that's an insane top 6. But if Brody is going to miss the first little while, like they could definitely use a guy who can play third pair minutes and be a solid 6-7 guy. guy. Johnson can't be that. So very interesting note there with Jack Johnson after not receiving a contract, after being a UFA, after not being brought back by Columbus, is heading to Minnesota on a PTO. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to the New York Islanders, apparently Ruslan Iskhakov, who was a solid Islanders prospect a couple of years back, didn't get an NHL contract, so he went over to KHL. The Islanders retain his signing rights. Apparently he's looking to try and make a comeback to the NHL level. The Islanders are a team who has a whole bunch of really solid forward prospects and forward players, so I wouldn't be surprised if Iskhakov was able to sign a new deal in the Islanders organization. Maybe he starts in the AHL, or maybe he gets dealt by the Islanders and sent to another team. It'll be very interesting to note there. But Iskhakov, who at one point was a top prospect for the New York Islanders, is looking to try and make a comeback to North America after spending the past couple seasons in the KHL, so very interesting to note there. Next, going over to the Boston Bruins, we talked about Charlie McAvoy and how he's recovered from his injury and should be ready to go for training camp. Well, the other key defenseman who was injured for a ton of time last year, and Hampus Lindholm, is also scheduled to be able to be ready for training camp. Hampus Lindholm, who has recovered from his knee injury suffered early last year, I think it was in October or November, will be ready for training camp. So it's a big boost there for the Boston Bruins. It seems like they will have both of their top pair of Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy ready for training camps. That's a big boost there for Boston to see that both those guys have been healthy, and good to see those guys have recovered from their injuries. So really great news there for the Boston Bruins to get Hampus Lindholm ready. And lastly, going over to the New York Rangers regarding their captaincy. They traded Jacob Trouba, who was their captain last year in December. They have not at this point in time announced a new captain. Larry Brooks looked into that, and he mentions that JT Miller might be one of his favorites for the captaincy. There's been a couple of players named who could be potential options for the captaincy for the Rangers, including JT Miller, including a couple of guys like Vincent Trocheck, like Mika Zibanejad, like Adam Fox. And there's been a couple of names thrown out there for the Rangers captaincy, but Miller's one who Larry Brooks thinks is a very likely possibility, and that makes sense. He's on a longer term deal. He was just acquired. He was originally drafted by the Rangers and just recently acquired by them from the Vancouver Canucks in season last year, so it makes some sense. I could see him going in a direction of like a Zibanejad or a Trocheck, but Miller I think does make a lot of sense to be the captain of the New York Rangers. So I'll have to wait and see on that, but those are all the news updates from the past couple of days. Lots of intriguing ones involving the Rangers captaincy, and I do think there's a very likely chance Miller could be named the captain. Regarding Hampus Lindholm's knee injury, regarding Iskhakov coming back to the North America, involving the Wild and Jack Johnson, and Korhonen signing over in the SHL, so very interesting note there. And lastly here, going over to a couple of trade rumors. So when it comes to some trade rumors, we got four things to talk about here. First, with Minnesota Wild and Columbus Blue Jackets, we talked about Dmitry Voronkov a little bit over past a while. Recently, I think it was a couple of videos ago on the fourthperiod.com, mentioned that they wouldn't be surprised if the Jackets could offer Voronkov in a trade package to get some sort of an immediate upgrade. Well, I saw a recent article. I don't think this is something that's been broken by insiders or anything, so this is just some speculation, but I saw an article recently linking Dmitry Voronkov to the Minnesota Wild. So that would be a very interesting one. I know that the Wild could definitely use some more forward help. They are finally out of majority of the problems of the Suter Parise buyout, so they do have some cap space. I do wonder how they would be able to fit Voronkov's new $4 million cap hit under their books, but still, the Wild do have a lot of Russian players. They have Kaprizov, they're about to get Yurov. There's a couple of really solid Russian players in the Minnesota Wild organization, so it would be a very smooth transition, Voronkov being a Russian player as well, and I think he could work really well. Like, you add Voronkov to a top six, already has guys like Boldy, Zuccarello, Eric Sinek, Kaprizov, maybe Yurov this upcoming season. Like, that would be a scary top six. On top of that top and blue line we just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So, I mean, if you add Voronkov to that team, that would be scary to face. Now, I'm not sure what the Jackets would want if they were to deal Voronkov. Like, I think they would probably want a couple of really big things. Like, we already saw the Jackets trade one of their top prospects in Juracek to Minnesota. They got a haul for him. So I wonder what sort of a deal they could try and hook up. Like, I'm not sure what the Minnesota Wild would want to subtract off their roster. We would have to wait and see on that. But I definitely think Voronkov could be a really solid fit in the Minnesota Wild top 9. And if the Minnesota Wild could somehow, both cap-wise and asset-wise, figure out a way to bring him in, I could definitely see it be a really solid addition there for the Minnesota Wild. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But I did see a recent article linking Dmitry Voronkov to the Minnesota Wild. Another recent article I saw, once again, no insiders mention this or anything, but a recent article I saw said that they were speculating maybe the Winnipeg Jets could go after a guy like Mattias Samuelsson. So there's a lot of very interesting defensemen currently on the trade block right now, involving Erik Karlsson in Pittsburgh, Rasmus Andersson in Calgary, and a couple of other interesting names. But another name that had come up earlier in the offseason in trade speculations was Mattias Samuelsson. Samuelsson signed for, I think, 5 or 6 more seasons, just over $4 million cap. But he's not the greatest offensive player, but he's a very solid defensive-minded top 4 defenseman. Now, Jets did lose a couple of players on the blue line this offseason, and they still don't have the best blue line, especially in the Central Division. With the Wild, we just talked about it, one of the best blue lines in the NHL. So the Jets don't have the best blue lines. They do have a couple of really solid blue liners, such as a guy like Dylan DeMello, such as a guy like Morrissey. Sandberg's trying to come into his own. Pionk signed a long-term extension. So they have some pretty good defensemen, don't get me wrong. But maybe adding one more solid top 4 defenseman would be a smart move there for the Jets. Like, Samuelsson doesn't have an overly egregious cap at just over $4 million. He can play second pair minutes and is a solid defensive-minded defenseman, which maybe pair with a guy like Neil Pionk or Josh Morrissey could be a very solid pickup there for the Jets. Now, if the Sabres were to move off of Samuelsson, I'm not sure what they would want. Would they want a guy like Cole Perfetti? Would they want more of a prospect guy like a Nikita Chibrikov? Or maybe a guy like Brad Lambert? There's a couple of options there for the Sabres if they were to hook up on some sort of deal. And once again, not saying that they're talking or anything, but I did see a recent article saying that Samuelsson might be a trade option there for the Winnipeg Jets. And I could see the fit, given the fact I think the Jets are maybe one more blue line move away from continuing to be one of the better teams in the Central Division. So very interesting note there, but I definitely could see Samuelsson go to the Winnipeg Jets. Next, we went over to James Murphy. He was talking about the Boston Bruins recently, and he mentions that Casey Mittlestadt could potentially be on the block and be dealt by the Boston Bruins. Now, we talked about Pavel Zacha over the past couple of videos, a guy who's been heavily linked to potentially being moved, even potentially before the season starts. And apparently another guy that could wind up getting moved is Casey Mittlestadt. I think Mittelstadt's entering the final year of his deal, or he's got one more extra year left at a $5.75 million cap hit. The Bruins made that Coyle Mittelstadt trade to get the second round pick and Zellers, which were the other two things they got from the Avalanche in that trade. Zellers was probably going to be a solid top 9 forward in a couple of years, and the second round pick worked out well for them. But Mittelstadt's a solid top 6, top 9 center. He can play second or third line center minutes, but with the Bruins team who's most likely not going to make the playoffs next year and could definitely try and move off some pieces, it seems like they don't have an overall abundance of confidence in the future with Mittelstadt, especially if he is in the final year of his deal. He'll be a UFA. Would you really want to sign in Boston, a team who most likely is going to go on some sort of a small retool phase, probably not make the playoffs for the next year or two? I'm not exactly sure. So I could definitely see Mittelstadt get moved. I think this deal might come together somewhere closer to the trade deadline, especially if the Bruins are out of the playoff race. I don't think Mittelstadt will go move before the start of the season, but maybe he does. We'll have to wait and see. But on top of Pavel Zacha, who's been heavily rumored to be dealt by the Boston Bruins, I expect Casey Mittelstadt's name to come up there, and I could definitely see Mittelstadt get moved, especially with his current contract. Maybe if the Bruins retained a little bit, and I definitely think for teams looking for a second or third line center, Mittelstadt could fit that bill. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but keep around the Boston Bruins as they could look to move Casey Mittelstadt. And lastly, here going over to Bob Duff and Jim Berginger. I think on the Hockey News, they were recently talking about Detroit and looking at the possibility of the Red Wings acquiring Erik Karlsson. So that's a very interesting possibility. We talked about that before. The Red Wings are in desperate need of a top 4 upgrade, and Karlsson, along with the guy like Rasmus Andersson, seem to be the biggest trade chips right now on the blue line. I think Karlsson would be a very solid fit in the Detroit Red Wings organization, be a solid like second pair defenseman on that team behind a guy like Moritz Seider. Now, they sort of looked at the pros and cons of maybe making a sort of Erik Karlsson deal. They said with Seider already on the top power play limit, would it really make sense to add Karlsson as more of a power play specialist onto that team? It wouldn't really help their 5-on-5 goal scoring. Karlsson's also not the best defensively, and the Red Wings definitely need a guy who can really play well defensively. So once again, would that be the smartest of moves for the Red Wings, especially if the Penguins want like a first round pick and young prospect for Karlsson? Like, if they really want that ask, would it make sense for the Red Wings? Probably not. But if the Red Wings can either make some sort of a move revolving around Erik Karlsson for maybe like a smaller ask, or if they can ask the Penguins to retain a little bit, maybe it would make some sense. And like I said, I think an Erik Karlsson playing on the second pair at this point in time, even though he's not the best defensive minded guy or points-wise 5-on-5 would be a massive upgrade on guys like Ben Sherratt or Justin Holl. So like, I don't think it's the greatest of fits in Detroit, but I think it's better than what the Red Wings have right now. So we will have to wait and see on that. I could definitely see Red Wings try and pull off an Erik Karlsson deal, especially if they're to offload a guy like Sherratt or Holl in that deal. I could definitely see that sort of a deal works. So we shall wait and see on that, but I could definitely see the cons of potentially not trading for Erik Karlsson if you're the Detroit Red Wings, especially if they aren't really willing to retain money or if the ask is too high. So we shall wait and see on that. But that's all I'm going to talk for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think about Detroit potentially going after Erik Karlsson, Boston potentially moving Casey Mittlestadt, Mattias Danielsson being acquired by Winnipeg, or Voronkov being acquired by Minnesota? Definitely want to get your thoughts on all of that, plus all the news updates and the signings from our past couple of days. That is all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're listening, subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. Also, a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I've linked it in the description below. Cannot wait to see you guys all for next video, and I'll see you guys soon.